All right. So, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, no matter where it is you're tuning in from. This is Founders Take, and we are so happy to have all of you here. I am your host, Brian Anselin, Program Manager at Line Run, and we are so happy to have Sergei Revzin joining us from School16. Sergey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Brian. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Definitely. And we talked about this right before we hopped on and started recording, but I love your background, especially being in the city right now and seeing a little bit depressed since there's not that much traffic and there's not a lot of energy. Seeing that gives me a lot of hope. So thank
That's
you.
good. Whatever I can do to help spread a little energy and show the background of nature so we can all feel good about being on digital webinar calls all day.
I love it. I love it. It sure beats the plain background I got. So you got me there. But going right into it, love to hear a little bit more about your background and your journey to School16, your current venture and startup. Love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And my journey into my own startup and starting companies, I think is when you go back, it's easier to put a thread through it and make it sound like a linear story, but it's never like that. And in reality, and there's a lot of trial and error involved, I think, for anyone. So if anybody here listening to this as a recording or here live, to have that be one takeaway is it's difficult to fully plan your career, and you kind of have to roll with the punches. But for me, I started off in finance early on in my career because that's what I thought business was when I was in school. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur someday, but tried a couple ideas in college. They didn't work out. My parents said, finish your finance degree and go get a job. And I thought that was probably good advice. But really quickly into my career, I realized that finance was just not what I thought it would be. And I didn't feel that much. I didn't feel like I really had an impact in my role, and I didn't want to have the jobs that my bosses had. And if you're ever in a situation where you look around at your bosses and you don't want their job, you should probably leave. And that's what I did. So I knew that I wanted to get closer to becoming a founder, and I realized that the best path to do that is to go work directly for other founders. And I was in Boston at the time. I'm in New York now, but I was in Boston at the time. That's where I grew up. And Boston is a great tech ecosystem. I joined a really small early stage startup in a sales role, 10 people. So I essentially got to define the sales function there and learn on the company's dime how to do sales. And I got to do everything from door to door sales to small businesses all the way through, selling to large chains and larger enterprises. That company got acquired by a larger organization. The larger organization that bought us raised a ton of money and imploded 6 months later. So it was a really interesting roller coaster to be on and understand what happens to tech companies from the inside. And a couple tech jobs later, sales related jobs later, I ended up starting my own software business with my brother, who's also my co-founder, that we ran for a few years. The business did okay. It wasn't a huge success, but it made some money, and it led me to my next role, which was more on running accelerators and actually getting into investing. So went from a founder to helping other founders get started. Ran an accelerator program for a company called Venture for America in Philadelphia and Detroit. Helped them raise their first venture capital fund and invest in startups from that organization, and then a couple of years ago, I joined NYU to help run technology investments for the fund at NYU. And 6 months ago, I started School16 to help people break into non-technical jobs in tech and accelerate their careers. And I'm still at NYU. I am also running this business on the side. We can talk about that a little bit later. Why I chose to do that, but I've been starting companies over the last decade. Most of them have failed. Some of them have worked out. And I always knew I was going to be a founder again. And so 6 months ago, I got the opportunity to do so with School16.
I love the fact that you brought up that going into entrepreneurship, everyone assumes it's, you jump right in and it's a linear path, but for nearly everybody, it really isn't. And there are a lot of twists and turns and a lot of roadblocks. And you mentioned about the company that bought out your startup and it kind of imploded a little bit after uh, the acquisition and going through the motions as an entrepreneur yourself. lot of adversity that you hit. I can definitely relate to that as well. But in terms from your experience, how have you dealt with adversity, and what lessons were you able to take that have been able to translate and apply to what you're doing now at School 16?
Yeah, the adversity part of it is it's par for the course. I think all of us face adversity in our careers at any point at one point in time, maybe even every year or every couple months, and it's totally normal. I think if you're an entrepreneur, it's a little bit more. How should I say? It's almost more enhanced, the adversity, right? The highs are very high, the lows are very low. When you're first starting a company, or when you're first getting into entrepreneurship and trying different ideas, you get very, very discouraged by the lows. And sometimes it makes you want to give up, and sometimes you do give up. I probably worked on 8 different business ideas before I made any real money with any one idea, right? And most of them failed probably because I gave up too soon. But as you get better at it, and as you adjust your approach with every new idea, based on what didn't work, or maybe it's the same idea that you've been working on for a while, and you adjust your approach based on what didn't work, you start to get wins and things start to work. And when that happens, you start to get a little bit desensitized to the negatives, to the falls, to the adversity, because you start to realize that it's temporary, that you can turn things around. You're always 1 or 2 or 3 experiments away from something working, or 1 or 2 or 3 pivots away from something working. So now that I've been doing this for some time, when things don't work, I almost smile to myself and keep going, and kind of don't let it affect me. Usually it affects you for the day, but I give it a day and I come up with a plan. Luckily, I have a co-founder that can help me, and we can commiserate together and the like. But we come up with a plan to adjust course, and we continue. We don't let the adversity affect us and stop us from executing. And I think that's probably the most important lesson that I learned is adversity is temporary.
Adversity is temporary. That's just a great mindset to have, not only for starting a venture, but also going into your career no matter what direction that goes in. So I think that's a really great piece of advice. And thank you so much for sharing that. Going from your journey now to specifically School 16 and your work helping non-technical folks break into the tech industry and specifically into business roles. Why was that such an important issue for you to tackle? And how have you been able to really grow and scale that from when you started only a few months ago to where you are now?
Yeah, I think the reason why it's been really important. I mean, for me, I've had the unique opportunity to both have experience in tech and in education, having been in higher ed the last couple of years. And you meet with enough students. I mean, NYU is obviously a huge school, 60,000 undergrad and grad students combined. My partner and my brother teaches at the SUNY school systems, and also at NYU as a professor. You interact with enough students, you start to notice patterns about what's broken, in people's ability to get opportunities, and actually even know what opportunities are right for them when it comes to what they do when they graduate. And I've been very well familiar with the alternative education model for a while. The proliferation of boot camps, in particular coding boot camps, has happened over the last 8 to 10 years, and for a reason. People want faster education, more focused education that's affordable, that they can leverage to get a job. And but I didn't see the same thing for the less technical roles. And a lot of people, I would say most people shouldn't learn how to code. Not everybody's going to be a natural coder. Part of the reason why I went into sales is because I was not very good as a programmer. I tried it, wasn't very good. And so I realized that I don't think it's right for this notion or assumption that if you're going to get into tech, you have to be like very technical. You can be, but you have to be technical, and technical roles are the ones that you're going to get. I think that's a completely wrong notion, and that everybody needs to learn how to code. I think it's a wrong notion because the majority of jobs in tech are non-technical. They're in sales, they're in marketing, operations, product, project management, etc. And there's a need for people in those roles, and there are both technical and non-technical people that want those roles. And I thought that that's a huge gap that needs to be filled. There needs to be a better on ramp for those kind of roles. I think it's a missed opportunity is that you can go to college for 4 years or even get a grad degree for 2 or 3 years and still not know what these jobs are really like. That seems backwards to me. And so I think the future of higher education, specifically when as it relates to tech and getting into tech jobs, is it looks a little bit different than what it is right now. And we decided we wanted to tackle it and we wanted to be at the forefront of it with School 16.
It's amazing, and I couldn't agree with you more. As someone who also works with a lot of students and works with administration and career services, there's this huge gap between employer and student. And you are extraordinarily lucky if you go to a school that actually addresses that gap and helps you bridge it, because nearly everybody, and I'm sure you can speak to this experience too, Sergey, nearly everybody is focused either on a core set of employers to feed students to, or they're focused on just the classroom school skills and polishing up your resume, and perhaps maybe a little bit on the interview. But essentially they drop you off at the career fair and they say go have a good time, but there's a lot that is lost in translation. And one of the things that really struck me when we started planning for our session today was your emphasis on that entrepreneurial thinking as the bridge between the classroom or whatever field you're coming in from going into tech, and using that as that transition and that bridge to help bring people into whatever role or position they wanted to get into in the future. How did you really come to that realization that entrepreneurial thinking was a crucial part of that formula? And how have you been able to really use and apply this to teach students to better their careers?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. For me, I think I myself and my partner came to this realization almost by accident because of our own careers. To be honest with you, I believe, and from my experience and my network, the people in my network, I've seen that tech as a career broadly, let's say broadly speaking, there's so many different jobs in tech, right? But we're saying broadly, tech as a career is actually one of the most cross-functional types of industries that you can be in. And it's not uncommon for people to change titles, change areas of focus multiple times, even in the same 5 to 10 year period. And that actually is exactly what happened to my partner and I. I started off in sales, and I went from sales to actually running programs to becoming an investor to now also published a writer on Forbes and HBR. My partner also went from sales to sales engineering to product management to running product and platform to then becoming a professor and an educator, and all within a very short period of time, like eight to 10 years. So that made me real, and the reason I think why we were able to switch careers multiple times and really create our own narrative and create our own pathway for what we wanted to do with our lives is because we approached it as entrepreneurs. And also, I think in part our entrepreneurial experiences helped us skip steps, which I also believe. And so, what does it mean to approach your career as an entrepreneur? That I think fundamentally it means to not you're not following any one playbook. Understand that you can create your own playbook, and understand that you can package your experiences no matter what they are, no matter how much experience you have, and no matter what experiences you have the full control and autonomy to package it in a way that can make you attractive to employers of all types and to roles of all types. It's just a matter of knowing how, and it's a matter of knowing what skills to pick up when. And most people completely don't feel like they have that kind of control.
It's so very true, and I really resonated when you said that it's people don't really understand what they need, one, and then two, if even if they get to that point, they don't know exactly how to use those things. And a lot of people see entrepreneurship and startup life and even our theme today, entrepreneurial thinking, they see it in one view, that Shark Tank, or seeing people drive around in really fancy cars and being really successful. How is that specific image different from what you're conveying with entrepreneurial thinking and applying it to your career? How is people's view of entrepreneurship different, and how should they really shift from that thinking to something that's actionable that they can really use for their careers?
Mm. Yeah, I think that the image of, to be clear, I think there's nothing wrong with the image of driving a fast car and living in a mansion and being able to travel. Uh, I think it's a bit toxic when we think that that's all there is to it. Because I think if you if you fall in the trap of following Instagram influencers and you think that that's what their lives are like every day, you're mistaken, because in fact, a lot of it is fake. And even if it's not fake, just because they are able to travel a lot doesn't mean they're happy, right? So I do think that it can be toxic, but at the same time, I don't think it's bad to want it. And I think if money drives you to in your career decisions, and if money drives you in your decision to be an entrepreneur, that's okay too. But know that it's not enough. That's the one thing that I think people need to change, is that if it's only money, at some point it's not going to be enough. Because I've seen a lot of people struggle when they're really only thinking about the money. They struggle to actually create businesses that make money, because they're too focused on the money and less focused on the product or the problem. And same thing with people in their careers. If they're too focused on the money and and getting the next job, then they spend less time trying to be good at the job that they are in. And what does it mean to be good at your job or to be good as an entrepreneur? It's being really good at solving problems. It's identifying what problems are important enough to solve and spend your time on, and it's being the person that people can rely on to solve them. And I hear from leaders all the time, and I mean, I also host weekly events, or almost weekly events, as part of School16, and we have people coming in from roles, and head of product, or a VP of marketing, or someone in a sales role, operations. Across all of these different roles, the number one thing that every single one of them repeats when I ask the question of, what does it take to succeed in this role, why did you get promoted when others didn't, they got promoted and they succeeded in their role because they just solved problems that other people were not willing to solve, and they figured out which problems were important to solve in the workplace. Sounds simple, but if you focus on that, I think you're going to do really well no matter what job you're in.
Solving problems as the core. I think that's a really important takeaway, no matter what your position is as you're listening and watching this. Solving problems really is a key to a lot of doors opening for you, whether it's you as a founder or you transitioning and trying to upward mobilize yourself in your career. So, love that very, very much. Taking it from that broad perspective of what entrepreneurial thinking is and solving problems back to what you're doing now at School 16, if we were to rewind just a little bit back to just a few months ago when you first launched it with your co-founder, what was the biggest mistake that you made back then in launching this and really trying to apply this entrepreneurial thought process to career development for these folks who wanted to get into tech? What was that number one mistake if you had to choose one, and what did you learn from that in the process?
Mm. You know, I think the number one mistake, and I don't actually know if it's avoidable, so I don't want people to think that, that just because I'm saying this is a mistake means that you can't make it. In fact, I think part of the way you learn how to run a business is you make mistakes, and you actually should be eager to make mistakes and identify them, so you can move on to the next step. You're going to, it's just going to happen, because you can't know everything as an entrepreneur. No one is born an entrepreneur. No one is born knowing everything there is to know about building a business. And every time you start a new business, it's different challenges. But I become, obviously, over the years, much better at testing ideas than I was when I started my first business. So this one worked much faster. But the first mistake we made was making assumptions as to who our target customer was. We we launched this venture literally right as the pandemic hit. I mean, March 31st was when we announced, I think, our first event, or I think we hosted our first event on April 1st. So it was right a couple weeks after the shutdown started happening in this country, in particular New York, where I am. And the writing was on the wall for us that a lot of people are going to be dealing with unemployment. A lot of people are going to be dealing with job uncertainty. And, we thought when it comes to providing people an on ramp to tech jobs, we specifically thought that we would be targeting service workers, a lot of the service workers that were going to be displaced in these roles, restaurants and movie theaters and retail stores and the like, because their jobs are going to be gone and they're going to be looking for something to do. And in fact, when we started hosting events and talking to our customers, we found out that many of our customers were already in tech, actually, and they wanted to level up and get better careers. Many of our other customers and users were people that were still in college, and they wanted to, they thought that what's happening now is risky, and they want to put their best foot forward and make sure that they line up opportunities for employment after they graduate. And then the third tier, which we almost didn't expect, were people that wanted to change careers that had good jobs. Maybe they're 10, 15 years out of college, right? So they're quite might be well into their 30s, but they are seeing the writing on the wall for their industries maybe evaporating. They want to get into tech, and they are seeing it as an opportunity to really learn about the different roles that are available to them. So, as an entrepreneur, you're going to make a lot of assumptions as to who your customer is and as to who you're solving a problem for and what that problem is. And it's your job to validate as quickly as possible that A, that problem exists, and B, it exists for the right person that you're trying to solve for. So that when you're actually trying to get customers, you're going after the ones that actually want what you're building and want that service or want that product that you're going to be offering.
So true, so true. And you can't really understate it enough that you're building a solution for a customer who needs it, and not just putting it out there and hoping and praying. And ultimately, that's what a lot of people really struggle with, especially the ones who end up failing. It's not understanding who their customer is and what they really want, and then translating that into a career setting. Since we're talking about applying entrepreneurial thinking, when people are applying to jobs, they submit one resume, and it's really just a template resume that they send out to everybody, even if it does not tell of the proper story or solve the problem that that job is looking for. So there's a lot of parallels between running a company, owning a company, and then owning your career and being in charge of where it goes. So I definitely think that there's this really great correlation that you've been able to really bridge. And really kudos to you and your co-founder for identifying that and for taking action on it.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that, and I fully agree with you. I mean, on the point of resumes, since you mentioned it, it's so true, right? I mean, a lot of people think that they take the spray and pray approach, and by the way, I completely understand why people do that. I used to do it myself. Like you need a job today, you're going to apply to as many as possible to increase your chances. That's what you're thinking when you're doing it. I want to increase my chances of getting a call back. I need to apply to as many jobs as possible, but in fact, when you're doing that and when you're applying to jobs that your story, your narrative doesn't fit, your resume or your cover letter doesn't convince them that you're going to solve their problems that they're having now, it's you're actually decreasing your likelihood of success, because you're forcing the employer to do the job of connecting the dots and justifying why they should bring you into an interview, and no one's going to do that. No one is going to dig around in your resume and try to make sense of why you make sense for that role. you know that's the most frustrating thing for any employer, is sifting through tons of resumes that are completely irrelevant, or cover letters that look like they were copy and pasted. But it's the most amazing experience when you're getting that cover letter that looks like it was written for you personally, that addresses things that are specific to the job and makes you really believe that that person understands your problem, and they will solve it on day one. That is an amazing feeling, and that's when you invite someone to an interview. And most people miss that. We hear about don't spray and pray sometimes with career services, but I don't think people really know why that's important, and they still continue doing it. Well, this is why. You have to think about how the other person on the other end of the line feels when they get your resume or your cover letter, and that's so critical. These are small things that I don't think we're ever taught formally. I think your program certainly helps with that. for college students. We work with college students and adults as well. Recent grads and grads as well, and even people you'd be surprised. Even people, we have one student that just finished our program who's a very successful corporate lawyer at a large corporation in Europe, and she wants to get into tech. And the thing, she was not aware of a lot of these things that we're talking about, just because she's been in industry for a long time, and she never really had to do that work, and she never got taught it formally in school of how to approach employers. And so it's fascinating to me that this is not really kind of formalized.
Definitely. It's something that, you brought this up. It's something that you learn piecemeal, and you hope that it's the right version of it because there's so many different flavors. I'm sure you've seen all of them. I've seen quite a few come past us with our program, but being able to a piece things together. B, you have to take the initiative to actually learn how to apply these things, which is a whole other story. And then C, the only time you're really going to get feedback if it's not through a program like yours or mine, or if you have a career coach, is you hope that a recruiter will give you feedback on why you didn't get a job, and that's really it. And I think an effort to make this a more concerted way for people to better understand all these things is definitely needed.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's a shame that there's no formal way to do this. I think part of it too is, of course, most colleges and universities in particular, the mandate is pretty broad, right? You're
Mhm.
learning a lot of different things. Career services is typically understaffed.
Yes.
There's only so much they can do, and so hey, if the big banks and consulting companies are the ones that are paying for a spot at the table, so to speak, and then they're going to customize their advice to what those employers want. And tech is oftentimes ignored. But I actually was doing some research recently on this, and even in MBA programs and some of the top universities in the world, about 15 to 20% of all MBAs are actually interested in technology jobs, and most of them are going to get up to non-technical roles. And I can tell you that most MBA programs are not designed to help you get tech jobs, and their career services centers certainly are not equipped with it as well. So it's pretty fascinating.
Isn't that crazy? Isn't that something? Everyone's basically all in the same pool. It doesn't matter where you get your shiny degree from. Everyone's
Mhm,
basically in the same place.
mhm.
Eh, One thing I think that really makes you unique, and you being a startup founder, you working with students, and also on the career development angle, is that you mentioned this towards the very beginning of our conversation, but you're treating this as kind of like a side project, and your full-time thing is at NYU. For folks who are either going through a very similar path, something like starting a side hustle, or really trying to have some type of security going into more of a risky venture, starting a business. What's your advice for them based on your experience at doing this, where you have a full-time job and then you're growing a business on the side? How have you been able to manage that, and what advice would you have for someone who's going through the same thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think one thing is that whenever you hear advice, someone give you advice that's in absolutes or absolute terms, I probably would avoid. I would avoid that advice. And so you hear a lot in the startup culture that you have to be doing your business full time, or else you're failing from the start, and you shouldn't even do it. And I think that's just silly and toxic and wrong. In fact, many of the most successful companies in the world were part time on the side. I mean, the founder of Nike, Phil Knight. I don't know if anybody here has read his book Shoe Dog, but he was working on Nike on the side for 15 years before it became what it became. He was a professor. He was an accountant. He did a bunch of other stuff. Most of us cannot afford to go do a business full time and wait 6 months or 12 months to see if it works. And most of us will not attract money from investors on a business idea. In fact, almost no one will unless you have a proven track record. So it's just already takes away the possibility for most normal humans to be able to do their own startup full time, unless maybe you have a good amount of savings or you have family money. Now, there's a caveat. If you do want your business to be successful, I do believe at some point you will have to go full time, and you want to create the systems and processes that will help you transition to full time on that business, because otherwise, at some point, it will inhibit the growth. But that could happen in 3 months, in 6 months, in a year, however long it takes you, and however much time you need. So for me, it was a very conscious decision. I'm lucky in that my partner is spending close to full time. He's got other commitments, but he's spending close to full time in the business. And I'm spending nights and weekends on it, and I have to be very good at time management. I have to make sure that I set aside time for the work. I have a flexible enough schedule at work where if I have to absolutely take a meeting during the day for my business, I can, and I'll make up for it by doing work in the evening for work, right? So I'm not at all intruding on the work that I have to be doing at my day job. But for me and for my schedule, it works. And I also fully believe, because again, I have tried so many different businesses. I fully believe for myself personally, I need to see revenue. I need to see substantial revenue before I go full time. I need to see some sort of semblance of product market fit before I go full time. Otherwise, it's just too much of a risk for me. I might as well be doing something else. And I also love my job at NYU, by the way. So I'm not in a hurry to leave. But at the same time, the School16 is something that's a personal mission of mine. It's a passion. We've been having great success with it to date. It's only been 5-6 months since we started it. And I do think I will go full time on it relatively soon. I don't know when it's going to be exactly, but it will be at some point in the future.
I'm very, very happy to hear that you're coming up to that point where you are going to branch off and make that your School16 your full-time gig. You're doing really incredible work, and it's not just from me seeing you or knowing and talking to you, but also hearing it from other people as well. So, if that's of any consolation, you are on the right track.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
As we, begin to, bring this all full circle, we have students, we have folks who are in tech, we have entrepreneurs who are watching this. From your collective experiences as both an entrepreneur and as someone who has had several jobs all over the place, technology, education, all over the place. What are the top 3 lessons that you can share about how to go about your career through the mindset of both being an entrepreneur and also taking charge of your quote unquote destiny? What 3 lessons can you impart to our audience today that they can take away and start using on their own careers now?
Good question, Brian. I mean, I think number one, we touched on this. We talked about solving problems, and I want to add a little color to that, because I think it might seem a little maybe like an amorphous of an idea. Well, yeah, isn't like all of work solving problems? There's a difference, I think. The people that tend to do well in their jobs and tend to get promoted and tend to have more flexibility and job stability, to be honest, as well, are the people that are very proactive about solving problems. So when they see something that's wrong, that doesn't work, that's broken, instead of going and complaining to someone, they come up with 3 ways that they could do it better. They bring it up to their boss, and maybe by the time they brought it up to their boss, they already tried one of the ways, right? So really, really proactive, and not not being the kind of person who's not willing to help and address issues, and kind of always hoping that somebody else will do it. So that's number one. And by the way, that one is like the easiest, because almost everybody that you work with, unfortunately, unless you're working for some really amazing organizations, most companies, even the best ones, will have people that are kind of trying to skate by and do a pretty good job at their job, but let everybody else to kind of take care of the other stuff. Someone else will take care of it, right? And that comes, for me, it's natural, because I've worked at startups most of my career, and when you're in a startup environment, like, there's no one else to do the thing. You have to do it. If you don't do it, it won't get done. But if you have that mentality in a big company, you're gonna stand out leaps and bounds. I guarantee that. Number two is to not let yourself fall into silos that somebody else defines for you. Now, you may have to be in a particular job for a year, let's say, and a particular job title. I mean, I've done jobs where I was cold calling 100 calls a day, every day for a year. It's not fun. It's a great learning experience, but it's not very fun. But I use that to leverage my next opportunity. So, if you're in this point in time right now where you're in a job that maybe it feels like a little bit of a slog, try to learn as much as possible from that experience. Try to take on other projects, from people, in the organization, so that maybe you can make it a little bit more fun. But don't worry too much about it. As long as you focus and you at least stay good at that, you will have other opportunities to do other things, either at that company or other companies. So I think that's just really important to consider. But what I mean by own and not let yourself fall into silos, don't let somebody tell you like you're just a salesperson or you're just an engineer, right? Again, there's so many things you can do in tech. I've seen engineers go from engineering to sales engineering to or other product focused roles where they get to interact with customers more and step away from coding. I've seen on the flip side, I've seen salespeople pick up more and more technical roles and get into product marketing, for example, which is a really fun kind of intersection between product and product launches, which involves a little bit more marketing skill set. So by being curious and exploring other opportunities and not letting someone else define for you who you are as an individual and what your title is or what your job is going to be, forever, it gives you a little bit more opportunity to ask for things. And I think that's the third piece of advice that I'm going to leave people with. Is once you are a little bit more flexible about where your career can be, is you need to ask. You need to ask for opportunities. You need to ask for opportunities internally with your boss. If your boss isn't helping you, right, if they're toxic or they're not a good manager, go out and build relationships with other leaders in the organization. Take them out to lunch. Ask to sit in on meetings, whatever it is, to build relationships with them, and then offer to take on projects for them, right? And asking for opportunities, asking for introductions to people. If you can't find that at your company, build relationships with people at other companies. The point is that there's always people out there that will be willing to help you. You just have to ask enough people and you have to ask in the right way. And most people don't realize that until they've spent 10, 15, 20, 30 years in a career and they're too stuck to do anything about it.
Really amazing advice, and thank you so much, Sergey, for sharing that. And uh, I really want to underline that last thought. So many people don't realize that it getting ahead the formula is fairly simple. It's taking initiative and doing it in the right way. And so many people get that step wrong, doing it in the right way. But it, it's you can't just go up to people and say, "I want this." It takes time to build a relationship, learn more about the nuances, and then approach them saying, "I have an interest." But it's either, at least from what I've found from a lot of people, it's either I want this now, or they just don't ask, and there's no middle ground. And I love the fact that you brought up that it is a process, and leveling up, or no matter which way you do it or how you do it, it is a process.
Yeah, and it takes practice, by the way. Like you don't be discouraged if the first time you try to ask for help, you don't get it, or somebody just doesn't reply to you, right? You can follow up, you can show why they should give you the opportunity. You can, start again showing some initiative so that they feel like you deserve it, and etc. And I don't want to pretend that it's easy. It's not natural for most people. It really isn't. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes, and the more you see opportunities for it.
100%. Uh, As we begin to wrap up our conversation, Sergey, for those of us who are more interested in learning more about School 16, where should they go?
So they can go to school16.co, school16.co. There's an events page there. We host events almost every week. We have one coming up on the 18th where we're going to have a panel of folks from product, marketing, ops, and sales that are in some top tier tech companies. And then people are going to get a chance to actually meet those folks afterwards in smaller breakout networking. And so, yeah, it's just everything's on our website. That's probably the best place. People can also feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. It's just Sergei Revzin. If you're in here, you can see how it's spelled, or Brian will include it in the material wherever you find this podcast or this recording. But I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, so you can follow my profile. And if there's ever a reason for us to connect, I'm happy to connect with you. But yeah, no, it's fairly easy to find us.
Sounds great. And you are correct. For those of you who registered, you're going to get information about Sergey's LinkedIn profile, also about School 16 and their upcoming cohort. So if any of this resonates with you and you're interested in getting more of a non-technical job in tech, we will have a link to the application for their upcoming cohort in that email towards the end of the week. So, with that, Sergey, this has been an incredible conversation. I can't thank you enough for taking the time and sharing your incredible insights with us and your experiences. And it's wide ranging. And I know I've learned a lot. And if I learned a lot, our audience has as well. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate you inviting me. I also really enjoyed the conversation and your thoughtful question. And folks, for those of you that made it live here, we really appreciated you attending. And for those listening, thanks for listening. Appreciate it.
Definitely. So that's it for today, but we have quite a few Founders Take sessions coming up in the month of November. We have actually one tomorrow on the 5th, and then we have two more towards right as we're going towards Thanksgiving. So hope you'll be able to join us there. Linerun.co is where you can find us. So until then, we'll see you later.
Right.